Okay, maybe the audio's on. It's on. Okay, this is going to kind of be somewhat of a repeat and a coverage of all of chapter 15. I started the other day talking about some of the forces. It's actually this. Um, this m should be inside the derivative because you can change the mass. In any case, it turns out that if the right hand side were V1, V2, DMV, it would still be this. The left hand side will stay this no matter what. So it is basically the concept of momentum, either way you look at it. He comes down and defines this one term right here as the impulse. So if you look at this and you focus in on that, think of it as I, the interval. If you had a variable force, it's just the area of that. Even if you have a constant, it's the same constant. It's the area. If you look at it from the standpoint of a system, okay, well, before he does that, he talks about this is a vector component. In other words, in his text, anything that's dark is a vector. So we may write M this way, plus the intervals of F, dt, I'm just rewriting the same thing, and dt, where that's a vector. So these are being vectors, meaning that you actually have three components. The x component, the y component, and the z component has to be satisfied in all. So he shows you that you might have a particle heading in that direction during a period of time, T1 to T2, there's a force which does not have to be constant. It can be variable, and you'll have the final position. So not only can it be variable, it can change. In other words, this particle is obviously going in this direction. When it gets done, it goes in that direction. So this force could not only be changing in length, it can change in its direction in order to take the particle and turn it that direction. Now, you can have systems of particles. And the word systems and particles should be paid close attention to, and this will become apparent shortly. And again, you end up with this equation where there's a subscript I associated with a particle, and if you go forward, he says something very interesting, but we'll pick it up in a little bit. He talks about the mass center of the system, and talks about this being equal to that. This is true, but we won't use it that much. So you get in here, and starts giving you some things. Here's one where now it sounds weird, but hey, you have a constant force, and your integration just becomes, okay, it tells us 200 newtons at 45 degrees for 10 seconds. Since this is a constant, it's being a constant, it can be just pulled out, multiplied times 10. And still constant, different with so cosine and sine instead of cosine, still 10 seconds, tells you whatever that is, normal force. Now the thing is, this is a kind of a state thing, and the fact that it's originally at rest on a smooth surface, meaning no friction. So what you see is no velocity here. Here's the force here, or force time, force time, force time, and here's your final situation, final state, which is V2, which was found here. So all these are very, they're not difficult. They still do require you to consider a free body diagram. In this particular case, you could have some friction here. So now you go P, apply it, but this time it's a function of time. So what you see is you'll see this thing taking off, or is going 3 foot per second down the incline. 50 pounds divided by 32, this gives you the mass. Moving at 3, and we're applying it for 2 seconds, we're applying this force. Obviously, seconds, and 2 times 2 is 4, so you see 40 along here. Just rise over line. 20. So in fact, this is the force as a function of time. Here's the way you could do it. You can multiply 40 times 2 divided by 2. Get to that. This is this value, which you don't have it technically yet. And now we call it the weight of this thing. Does he do? Yes, he does a free body diagram. The weight of this thing does not change. Also, because of that, you have a value this way, 50 sine of 30, which occurs constantly over 3 seconds. You also have this value, which is constant. The reason you assume this is constant is because actually you shouldn't assume until you work this one. And your sum force is going to lie. And then you can get the actual value of NC, put in here, and for that matter, put in here. Sorry, shouldn't put it in here because this is how you found NC. Put it in here, and you'll get your answer. Now that you solve this, he basically says you can solve it using sum of the forces equal mass times acceleration. And now out of this, so this is actually sum of the forces. Oh, it says it right here. Sorry. Now you can sit there and take this equation, integrate it over its 2 seconds, and you can still get out your 44. Here's what you got the other way. System of particles being 2 particles. You have 2 individual ones of these, in which the force being applied is different from each. So here is for A, I'm looking for B, and all you're noticing here is there's no variable force. This time is in fact this one. And if I can include this term in the force too, because now, okay, look at this somewhere. Because this GT right here, I decided this to be positive, so therefore this one's negative. You have this one. They both occur over 6 seconds. Your initial speed is 0, and you are almost in the position of solving this if you had the tension. But you have the tension in both equations, because you have 2 blocks, therefore an equation for each. But at this point, it looks like you have the tension, you have the velocity A, the velocity of B, so you need something else. So this is where you use the length of the rope, you take its derivative, and you have a relationship between dA and dB, so you have 1 equation, you have 2 equations, and you have 3 equations. So we will solve some of these later. But the goal here is to take us all the way through the chapter right now. Okay. Now, he says the conservation minimum for a system of particles. Now, let me kind of explain that by looking at this equation paired to, maybe I should just copy these and put them. Okay. Let me explain how you got from one to the other. And we'll do other equation did not have a term. Why did it not have that term? When you're looking at this, it does not have that term. Why? Well, one chapter, one section, he says this, then he says this. Now, what we did on the board the other day is we talked about a bullet flying along at 1,000 feet per second and hit a block and became embedded in the block. So we have A, you know what, I equal 1 and I equal 2, going along with his indices here. Now, let's write this equation for this situation. What we have is M1 V1 plus M2 V2. This comes from right here. Need to be okay, so again, this comes from that summation. Now, we actually have this. Okay, so so what I'm doing here is I'm executing the summation and writing this out. So I have interval, I'll say T1 to T2 of F1 T2 plus integral T1 to T2 F2 dt equals to, okay, so this is the I, so this should actually have an index with a 1 here, index with a 1. So again, index out here, and V1, 2 plus M, V2, that's state 2. This is the final state after impact. It's the initial state before impact. And let's pay particular close attention to this term and this term. This term specifically deals with the forces that are applied to the bullet. So during the impact, there is going to be a force applied to that bullet. Say this will be F1. Now, technically, these are both vectors, just like the velocities are as well. And then we got the block. Okay, this one deals with 1. This one deals with I equal 2. This is I equal 1. So it stands to reason that during the impact, whatever was happening, whatever this object was putting a force here, this object was putting an equal and opposite force there. So in fact, F1 plus F2 is just equal to 0. Now, let's suppose that we just want to define the system as, in other words, we're just looking at the bullet. So if we just look at the bullet, there is only I equal 1. There is no I equal 2. So what actually happens is the bullet has a force on it, and it slows down as it enters inside and gets embedded in the block. But we're not considering this. So in other words, in this particular case, where we only focus on this, where this is the system, and the only term we would have there would be this one. You would have this one, and that one. And so it is possible to focus on the bullet, but to do this, you need to know how long the impact takes and what the actual force is. Okay, that is not necessarily that easy to come by. So this is a description of why that F term doesn't exist here. Is because you're looking at a situation where the external impulses acting on a system of particles is zero. In other words, during the impact, there was not an external force on it. There might have been this block hitting that block, but block 1 and block 2, it's equal and opposite the forces are. And so you go through this and you realize this makes it kind of interesting. First thing is you're stuck within an interesting dilemma. Let's talk about that by looking at this particular problem. He says we have a certain tanker A and another one B. They hit, but after they hit, this is a big key here, they stick together. They have couples and they stick together. If that is the case, then they both have the same final velocity. So you got the initial velocity here, and the final velocity would both match coupled together. One of the things I want to draw out is that there is a sign convention here. If that's the sign convention, then you have a plus 1.5 plus 1.5 right here, and you have a minus 0.75 there. And that's in fact what you get. The minus sign is seen here, but it's basically attached to that. There is no negative mass here. It's attached to the sign direction of the velocity. Now, you could say, okay, here's the key. Now that you've got that, he said part D, find the average impulse, but you've got to be able to be told how long the impulse, the average force between them, the coupling takes place in 0.8 seconds. This, you would have to have a high-speed photography in order to pick that up. In other words, if a car crashed into, it's a terrible drawing, crashed into another car, and someone were willing to photograph the thing during the entire impact and come up with a delta T, they actually could figure out what's the force put on this average force. You couldn't figure out time dependent force, I don't think. Not without a lot of. So what he's saying is, okay, now I'm going to look at only this train car and say, okay, there was a force that other car put on there in order to slow it down. What I've done is I've said this is the average. It occurred over that time. That was specified. It would be given in the real world. You have to use high-speed photography in order to get that. But this will be apparent, and this will be apparent. Where did this half come from? It came from the final velocity of them. after they both got coupled together. And it tells you that's the average force that's applied to this train car in order for its final velocity to be a half a meter per second after 0.8 seconds. So this is one way to look at it. And if you look at this problem very close, you'll realize that in this term, in this part of the analysis, there is no external forces. However, if the system changes, and you decided to stare at this from this perspective, and you decided the system now is this, whereas before it was both cars, now you will have a force. This force is the force that occurs between them, which is equal and opposite. And so you end up going through all these. Here's something interesting. Let's see if I can get down to the bottom. Well, anyway, here you've got a situation where, maybe I will pay real close attention. Both car A and B each have this math. One looks like it's going 2, the other looks like it's going 3. The velocity stood just before they collide head on. If no energy is lost during the collision, determine the velocities after the collision. Now, this problem is a little bit different because you were given, okay, so you've got the math. You can put down the mass for all of them. You have this 3 meters per second right here. You have the -2 right here. But you don't have the final velocity of either one of them. They did not attach to each other. They bounced off each other. So you get a term that looks just like this, or sorry, not a term, but an equation. How do you manage? Because you have 2 unknowns and 1 equation. You need another one. So what he's saying here is, hey, lost no energy. What was the energy beforehand? We all had of the system. Okay, let's look at the system. The initial velocities had 150, moving at 3 meters per second. Now notice over here it was a minus up here, but you're squaring it, so it really doesn't matter. Just the kinetic energy. Out of this, you're going to get a term. There isn't a spring or potential energy. Now, we went to the second one, so you have to pay real close to this. What I mean by this, the right-hand side looks like this. Okay, so now that it looks like that, the right-hand side, you get it looks like this. So now you got this equation, not a term, sorry. Again, that's an equation. So you got 1 equation and a second equation. Okay, I guess he's labeling it. So there's your first equation, there's your second equation. You can take the VA, stick it in here, and you'll have VB, and -6. You can solve them. Look out with this, and you'll work your way out till you get the answer here and here. Notice something interesting. If you have no energy loss and have an impact, this is something that occurs. Okay. I have this one going to the right. Okay, so let me go down here. Here I have A moving to the right at 3, and A. And then I have B moving to the left at 2. Let's say that. Now, this says the final thing is A moving to 2 and B moving at 3. It's as if all of my impulse was moved to him and all of his impulse was moved to me. This will be something that we'll see later when we talk about this. Now, and we'll talk about a term that happens there that makes this always the case. So we did 2 cases. One, where they stuck together, and 2, where no energy loss. Now let's keep those stuck in our heads. We'll go to the next section. And then after that, we'll complete the whole chapter here. We've got to slide forward until, let's see, we are right there. Okay. But there's something special about both of those cases. And this right here, this section will unify that. Okay, so you have an impact. Then there's a period in which there's a deformation, and then there's a period in which there's a restoration. So here's what I mean. Before your impact, then you have this region right here where you're deforming the 2 solids. And you get the maximum deformation, and he calls it restitution. So you get a deformation phase, a restitution phase. Okay, this is just a single point in between that identifies the difference between the deformation and restitution. Now, he uses this P here and an R here. Now, what we'll do is we'll use this concept of, and he's going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'll show you where he's doing it. We use the thing where we go from here to here, and then we look at this term, and then we look at this term. This is just a defining point that separates the 2. And during this, during when we're looking at this here and this here, we're going to look at just a system like that. He does that on the next page. So what he does, the first thing he does, he says, hey, I went from before impact to after impact. Yeah, I got that. Then he says, hey, wait a minute. I've got this. Now let's remember, the P is the deformation. That's P is the deformation. R is the restore. So we went in here and did this, but when we're doing this, only staring at A. And then we go in the restitution phase. Going in this restitution phase of A, and we have that. And then we say, hey, wait a minute. Let's divide these 2. Or this one, that one. You get something like this. Now, it comes up with this new coefficient of restitution. And we'll discuss how that affects the 2 cases above. Then, what he does is he turns around and does that same thing, except he does it with the B here. And I wish he would have done that. But when you do it with the B, you get the same. Now remember, this is the same thing as that, even though you're looking at B here. Now what you find out, something interesting here, is that these old terms can be put together. And if you look at it long enough, you'll realize this equation and this equation can be combined together to give you something that has a definite form of the coefficient of restitution. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take that term, and I'm going to go back to the other problems and look specifically at what E is in the first problem, 2 trains, and then the second problem, which is the That what it was. Okay. It was the bumper cars. Okay. So in the bumper cars, we ended up with this. And so what I'm going to do is go over to this page and look at the bumper cars. So in the bumper cars, what we ended up with, object A, object B. Before we had 3 minus 2. After we had minus 2 with A. This is B. And I had 3. What's the coefficient of restitution during this impact? First, let's go back to the book. Okay, make sure I have 3 minus 2 minus 2, 3. 3 minus 2 minus 2. Okay, so go back to the book. Go all the way back down to term. Coefficient of restitution. If you look, it will be the final over the initial. Let's do this. B, A, final, BB, final, over B initial minus BA initial. So this will be our final, this will be initial. So what you'll end up with is BA final is minus 2. BB final is a 3. VA initial is 3. And BA final, do I have that right? And BA initial, oops, wait a minute. BB, oh, okay, look, the final, VA final, BB final, and BB initial, minus VA initial. Let me get all this math. What you get is a 1. It turns out if you have C equal 1, you have no loss of energy. Now, let's look at the train example. Okay, so I have 2 trains, A and B. And then I have A, well, let me just do it. It's A and B here. I think I had them like this. I think it was 1.5 and 0.7. I better go look though. Go on the train. Did I pass over the train? It might have been that page, yeah. So I had 1.5 to the right, 0.75 to the left. Okay, now, what is their final velocity? It is 0.5 to the right. So now they're both going 0.5 to the right. Now, here we go. Oops. I'm just going to get this. I'm going to copy and paste it in here. Now, hopefully I don't get confused. VA final, this, minus VB final, this, VB initial, and VA initial. And guess what? It's equal to 0 because of the top. E is equal to 0, they are stuck. together, or the maximum loss of energy. Now, if you look at the book, okay, you may have talked about this. I don't know if this is happening on the video, but the screen is darkening and lightening meantime. I may have gone too far back. Here, and everything, open, find restitution and restoration. We have. Does he say anything? Okay, here we go. Okay, so he says this about these two. You have a completely elastic or perfectly elastic impact, or what he calls a plastic impact, meaning they get stuck together. U is equal to 1 for that. B is equal to 0 for the other. And you can get into the E is stuck or is between 0. You can see it when you're playing pool. You can see it's pretty close to 1. So I think I'll call it quits here for right now. And we'll come back to this, because the only thing we've got left in this whole section is the fact that you can have oblique impacts that are not along a line. This occurs a lot on the pool table. That's the whole point of the pool table. And it turns out there's a line of impact in those particular cases. There's a line in which the impact occurs, and there's a plane in which the contact occurs. And it turns out the equations along the, okay, so if you stare at this for a minute, you've got a term right here, right? And then you've got a term right here. So it turns out, and this sounds weird, but the momentum equation here, you've got the x momentum equation, the x, and you've got an x, and x, and x. It turns out this is the line of impact is where you use the coefficient restitution. The other line of impact, take a look real close. Now, let's just look at the top one, A, for example. We're going to ignore all this for a minute. This doesn't even exist. And if you look at this real close, okay, if you look at the x, you have a certain speed to the right. You put a force on it to maybe slow it down, and you alter your speed. You have a speed going north here, this direction. There is no force this way or this way on this block, slowing it or speeding it up. So it stands to reason that the speed after the impact is the same as the speed before. The same argument can be said about B. The speed, in other words, the velocity of B in the y direction is before impact. The same thing as the velocity y after impact. Why? Because there is no force pushing this way or that, slow it down. So in your oblique impacts, something like this, where you're playing cool, you have an equation along this line in which you use momentum and you use E is equal to a certain number. Along here, this is the same as this. Your velocity is the same as that one. And with that, I think I'll call it good for today.